Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation on how does model cold tongue bias affect the seasonal prediction of South China late spring rainfall. This published work was carried out together with Professor Francis Chi-Yung Tam and Professor Gabriel Arjanao from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Late spring usually marks the end of the dry seasons in South China before entering the wet summer months. But variability in the transition may either prolong the dry seasons or advance the wet season. So the seasonal prediction of late spring rainfall has huge impacts on South China water management. The El Nino Southern Oscillation largely controls the interannual variability of South China rainfall. It has two types. The first type is called the Eastern Pacific El Nino, with sea surface temperature warming in the Eastern Pacific. This figure shows the reanalysis anomalies during Eastern Pacific El Nino in the late spring. The arrows represent the low-level winds, and the shadings represent the rainfall. El Nino induces the Western Pacific anticyclone, with southerlies from the South China Sea bringing abundant rainfall to South China. This figure shows the seasonal forecasts. The ECMWF forecasts are initialized in March, and we focus on the ensemble mean. The southerlies and rainfall are well captured, so it is skillful during Eastern Pacific El Nino. The second type of El Nino is called the Central Pacific El Nino, with sea surface temperature warming in the Central Pacific. This figure shows the reanalysis during Central Pacific El Nino. The southerlies are absent over South China Sea, so there is less rainfall over South China. But this is poorly represented in the model. It overestimates the southerlies, which brings too much rainfall to South China. So it is not skillful during Central Pacific El Nino. So a question is, what could be causing the poor skill? And we believe it is the model mean state bias. The black contours in this figure show the reanalysis mean sea surface temperature. The colder sea surface temperature in the Eastern Tropical Pacific compared to the West is called the cold tongue. And the shadings show the model difference. It is pretty clear that the model cold tongue is too cold. So how does this cold tongue bias affect Central Pacific El Nino? We believe that it starts by affecting the tropical Pacific convection. Previous studies have shown that convection is sensitive to the sea surface temperature. This figure shows the observed relationship between tropical rainfall and sea surface temperature during El Nino. As expected, the rainfall increases with the sea surface temperature, but the relationship is non-linear. For example, the rate of increase in rainfall is higher at higher sea surface temperature compared to lower sea surface temperature. So the anomalous convection is not only dependent on El Nino, it also depends on the mean state of the sea surface temperature. This figure shows the anomalous sea surface temperature associated with Central Pacific El Nino. The model captures the reanalysis sea surface temperature warming pretty well. Next figure shows the low-level anomalous velocity potential. The cold tongue bias in the mean state induces weaker anomalous convection in the Central Pacific. This is seen in the weaker velocity potential in the model on the right, as highlighted by this dashed box, compared to in reanalysis. The next figure shows the low-level anomalous stream function. In the model on the right, the weaker convection induces a weaker cyclone in blue to the northwest of the convection, as highlighted by this dashed box. This weaker cyclone compared to reanalysis leaves more space in the model for the Western Pacific anticyclone in red to develop eastward in the Philippine Sea. And the enhanced southerlies then bring too much rainfall to South China in the model. Besides affecting Central Pacific El Nino, the cold tongue bias also affects Eastern Pacific El Nino, but we propose that the effects are different because of the different climatologies. This figure shows the anomalous sea surface temperature associated with Eastern Pacific El Nino. Climatologically, the thermocline is shallower in the Eastern Pacific, so the cold tongue bias induces a stronger thermocline positive feedback. This leads to too much warming over the Eastern Pacific in the model compared to in reanalysis. Because of the model warming being too strong, the model convection is also too strong as compared with reanalysis. The stronger convection in the model induces a stronger cyclone in blue to the northwest in the model. This leaves less space for the Western Pacific anticyclone in red to develop eastward in the Philippine Sea. But this anticyclonic bias is actually too far east to affect South China substantially. So the model remains skillful over South China. So to summarize, we have investigated the seasonal prediction of South China rainfall under two types of ENSO. In the ECMWF model mean states, we identified a cold tongue bias. During Central Pacific El Nino, this bias weakens the convection over the Central Pacific. This ultimately leads to a stronger Western Pacific anticyclone in the model and too much rainfall over South China. Our result, therefore, highlights the importance of model sea surface temperature mean states for skillful prediction of El Nino interconnections and South China rainfall. Thank you.